Hey, everybody, I'm Carl Krauskopf, and I've dedicated my career to real estate investing with a special focus on multifamily properties. Over the last 5 years, I have learned the tremendous value that these types of properties have to offer from an investment perspective. And today, I'd like to share some insights with you. So, my top five reasons of why I love investing in multifamily are scalability, stability, cash flow, diversification, and the value add potential. So to start at the top, from a stability standpoint, multifamily properties are considered one of the most stable asset classes to invest in from a real estate perspective. I remember my very first multifamily that I bought was about 4.5, maybe 5 years ago in a city called Spokane, Washington. This was a small little duplex, and it was tucked away right off the drag. And I went in, I bought it in October, and I placed, or rather, I had my real estate broker, who, they're not necessarily incentivized to find the best tenant. So again, lesson learned there on me from a screening perspective. But nonetheless, I had to evict my very first tenant that was placed. They stopped paying rent the second month that they were in there. It took me about a 3.5, 4 month process to start to realize that I really needed to do the eviction process and then actually complete the eviction. Now, you might ask, what's so stable about that is it's from a perspective that the other tenant who was on the other side, renting the other side from us, that the rent that tenant brought in covered the debt service. And so I wasn't necessarily needing to come out of pocket on the mortgages. Now, that meant, I wasn't making any money on the property, even though I was putting in a lot of this time and effort. I had to go in and renovate the property, the unit that I ended up evicting. But nonetheless, I still had one tenant that was paying. So I was breaking even. I was excited about that. Cash flow is the second topic. It is the antithesis, or it's kind of a continuation of the stability from a sense. Now, once I ended up placing that second tenant, what ended up happening is that not only were they covering, not only was I covering the debt service, but now any of the additional rent that was brought in by that second unit started to become cash flow into my pocket. And so now I was starting to see $900 checks coming in from a distribution standpoint. And that was fantastic. That was it. I was hooked. 5 months into the project, after blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of money put into it, I was hooked. I loved the rental space. I loved what multifamily had. Now, obviously, as I mentioned the other day, is that I spent a lot of time flipping and developing over the course of the next 3 to 4 years, but I learned a lot through that process of how to add value, how to estimate, how to rehab, the processes, how to manage service providers and contractors. So certainly don't regret any of my time in the flipping and the developing space, but I'm coming back to my roots. Love multifamily real estate, love the rental, love the cash flow and the stability that it has to offer. From a scalability standpoint, now this is one of my something that I'm super passionate about. I spent 10 years in corporate space, really working on growing a services company, really focused on growing new business, new clients, also same store revenue, figuring out how we can upsell our clients in that sense. And it's not a whole lot different from the apartment and real estate space. Is how can we go in, and we'll get into it in a minute, on the value add side, but from a scalability standpoint, is how can we use some of these things to really improve, not only improve our return on investment, but also how can we use some of these, the size that we're at, to negotiate better rates with our service providers. How can we use our size to be able to reduce the amount of work that we need to do? So for an example, is I've got a 30 unit apartment out in central Washington. Now, if I were to own 30 separate single family homes, I would have 30 separate mortgage payments to remit. I would have 30 separate utility bills to pay. Now, on the other side is I've got now one mortgage payment to make per month. I've got one utility bill to pay, and it's much easier now. Obviously, I've got the ability to afford a professional property manager on it as well. So they are able to handle, and they do handle a lot of that that operational stuff. But nonetheless, there's a lot less kind of paperwork that we have to do. So again, from a scalability standpoint, great there. Diversification, tenant diversification is kind of what I mean here. I've got a 12 unit apartment complex in downtown Seattle that I'm closing on. And, I met all of the tenants now. Not only were the tenant base culturally diverse, but they were also diverse from an employment standpoint, which to me, going into a recession or recessionary times, is so critical, because you're not over reliant on one specific employer, potentially on one specific industry. And it just so happens that 10 out of 12 of the tenants work in technology. Now they work at various tech companies here in Seattle, ranging from Amazon to mid-sized and startup employers. With the kind of the outlier was a nurse, but nonetheless, you've got this opportunity to have diverse employment. Now with single family residential, it's the opposite, right? If you have one tenant, you have one job, and that one job is could be, if they're a service worker or if they're tied to a specific industry, there's the downside of, well, what if that one tenant loses their job? Um, and obviously tied to a specific sector. Value add potential, I'll go into a deep dive on to value add potential and adding value to apartment complexes. But this is again one of the big reasons why multifamily is seen as such a valuable and such a desirable asset class to be a part of, is because you can go in and add a ton of value in different ways, right? So what is value? Let's dissect that for a second. So adding value means, when you buy the property, let's say you buy it for $1 million, you add value to have it equal to $1.5 million worth of value. So you're doing something in order to force the value, force appreciation. And with multifamily, there's a lot of different ways to force appreciation beyond just renovating it, right? With single families, you're renovating to force value typically. With multifamily, one of the most common is to renovate and increase rents in order to force value, right? In order to increase your collections or increase your income, and ultimately your net operating income. But there's a lot of other ways, like adding new revenue streams, like storage, charging for storage, parking, pet fees, late fees, application fees, et cetera, et cetera. There's also other ways, like eliminating expenses, right? So some of the things that I've done in the past is I've reduced or actually eliminated gas expense by changing the heat source from, let's call it a natural gas boiler, to now electric heat pumps. Now the tenants were already paying for the electric. And so now we've given them an option, or rather, we've given them a better option to have heating and cooling all kind of on demand, as opposed to on demand natural gas heated water, which is a lot less efficient and more difficult to control from the tenant's perspective. So more options, also less expense for us. Now, another way again that you can do that in a less cost prohibitive way would be to actually execute a utility bill back program. So you don't necessarily have to eliminate the expense, but rather you're going in and trying to collect, or you're charging back the tenants. Typically, I like to shoot for no more than 60, upwards of 75% of the utility bill billed back to the tenant. So when if possible, I like to eliminate the expense via displacement. So um, again, I'll go into a deeper dive on value add here in the next couple weeks, or excuse me, the next couple days, and I'll give a lot more examples around what I've done. But anyway, to wrap up, I want to keep this short. To wrap up, multifamily investments, I love them. I think that you should certainly explore them as a potential to add into your investment strategy, investment portfolio, for a couple of reasons. Again, stability, scalability, cash flow, diversification, and the potential to add value. So, please feel free, reach out to me, send me a message. I'd love to connect, see how maybe adding some multifamily, how I can help add multifamily into your investment portfolio and answer any questions. Now, if you do like this content, please like, comment, add questions, subscribe, do something so that way I know how to tailor this content so that way it's relevant to you. Um, and again, just shoot me a DM if you've got any questions. Happy to answer them specifically.